Um, this is one of those weeks, man. It's one of those Sundays where I stare at what I'm supposed to be talking about, and I'm so aware of how bizarre the Easter message is. When we start talking about dead bodies rising up, we start talking about the tomb being empty. The story gets weird, and I just want to say from the beginning, like we as Christians, we know that it's crazy, right? Like we know the story's crazy. That's the whole point. Like you guys like if you went to public school, if you had the public school experience, you maybe remember those times where you'd hear a crazy story, and somebody like, man, did you hear so and so did such and such? You're like, what? No way, right? And you're like, nah, I don't think so. And then you go to like the next class, and everyone's talking about it. What? You go to the next class and everybody's talking about it. Before you know it, the entire school or your entire workplace or everyone in your circle is all telling the same insane story. And there's people who are sitting there going, I was there. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but I saw it happen. I was there. The story about Jesus is so insane. It's so crazy that people have been going, nah, I don't think so. That sounds impossible. And for 2,000 years, we keep telling the story. Like, that's how crazy the story is. It's so wild that we've been talking about it for literally thousands of years, and we're going to keep talking about it until Jesus comes back. The Easter story is this message. Let's start with John 10:10. Let me just show you this. John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus makes this bold claim. He says, I came that you may have life. He says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that you may have life and have it the full.
Amen.
The gospel is a promise of a full life through Jesus Christ. That's what we're here for. That's what we talk about. We talk about an abundant life found in the gospel of Jesus. But what they didn't know when Jesus says this is how he was going to accomplish it. Jesus' game plan is he's going, I'm going to be the sacrifice for humans, for the sinners of the world, which is all of us. And look, if you're just joining us, if you're visiting with us, if you're one of those people who are like, I'm not a sinner, I do pretty good, like I'm one of the good guys. Riverside probably isn't your church. We're like, we love you and like stick around. Like, thank you for being here. But look, we know we are sinners. There's parts in us that we're working on, right? Nobody's there yet, right? Anybody achieve perfection yet? None of us, right? So we know the gospel message is God says, listen, I'm going to take you who are messy and broken and sinful and struggling sometimes. And I know you look good on Easter Sunday, but I know you don't always have it all together. He goes, I'm going to take you and I'm going to give you an abundant life. But in order to do that, I've got to go to the cross. And the promise is that Jesus will be the sacrifice for our sins on the cross, and everybody watching it happen goes, man, this is crazy. I thought he was the one. I thought he was the Messiah. I thought he was the coming king, and we just watched him go to the cross and die. And then 3 days later, you guys know the Easter story, right? If you guys don't know it, get with me afterwards. This is like the first Sunday, the first Easter Sunday that I'm not preaching the Easter story. So this is me like rushing through it, okay? So 3 days later, the tomb is empty, and everybody starts telling the story about the empty tomb. And we've been talking about it for 2,000 years now. And here's why this matters, okay? My whole goal this morning is to go, how do we remind people why Easter matters? And it has everything to do with Jesus, but it also has everything to do with you, okay? Yeah, so here's my premise. Here's what I'm submitting to you this morning. Easter matters because you matter. Okay, and that's not normally the way we preach Easter, I don't think, but that's what I'm working on. Easter matters because you, as a person, you have a value to God. He looks at you, says, I see you, Amen. I made you, I respect you, I love you, and I want to be in a relationship with you. And so Easter matters, the empty tomb matters because you matter. And so here's what I want you to see. Before Jesus died on the cross, and the tomb was found empty, before he rose from the dead on that Easter Sunday, he did another resurrection. Because here's the thing, like, if Jesus died and then rose and went to heaven, and that's all he did, like, if that is all that was for, is just the show that gods can rise from the dead, then all of us would look at that and would go, all right, cool, like, cool story, doesn't have much to do with me, right? But when we realize that the whole reason Jesus conquered the grave is so that he can give you abundant life. So that Jesus can come into your life and he goes, you too are sleepwalking through your life. You're numb to your experiences. You're like the walking dead. You were zombified and you're going through your life, but you know you're not living abundantly. You're not living a full life. And the message of Jesus goes, I'm going to die on the cross and conquer the grave so that I can conquer your death as well. So I can conquer your spiritual death. So I can conquer that numb, dissatisfied feeling that we get when we know we're living on autopilot and we're just sleepwalking through our own life. Like God calls us away from the apathy, away from the grave, and away from all of that despair we get into when we know we are not living the life that we were made to live. And so Jesus goes, I will conquer the grave to give you abundant life. And here's how we know this matters, because he didn't start with himself. Jesus did not, he was not the first grave he conquered. There's a story right after John chapter 10. There's a story about a man named Lazarus in the Bible. Right. And if it wasn't for Lazarus, I would argue that Easter probably doesn't matter a whole lot. If this is just something that Jesus did for himself so that he could conquer his own grave, so that he can be like, I'm God and you're not, look at what I can do, then we go, that's cool, but that's no different than some of the Greek mythos and some of the other teachings that were going on around that time. Lazarus is what makes the empty tomb on Easter matter. And I want to show you that this morning. As we move on in our text, you jump over one chapter to John chapter 11, first few verses. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick, and he was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Some of you guys remember the story of Mary and Martha, and we'll save that for later. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. If you're a Bible nerd like me, you know the story. If you don't know the story, that's okay. This is just a reference so that we know who we're talking about here. He says, so the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you loved is sick. So Jesus knows these people, he's friends with these people, and somebody that he loves dearly is sick and on their deathbed. Now here's where the story gets weird. Look at what Jesus does with this. If you have a Bible and you're in chapter 11, we're going to skip around a little bit, so there's going to be pieces of this we skip just to keep it concise. But I encourage you, read it through because it's a great story. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. Now it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. If this verse means nothing to you, let me say it again. You have gone through something where you go, this is it. This is the end. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got no way out. I've got no answers here. And so often the message of Jesus is just to remind us this sickness does not end in death. Like this isn't the last chapter of your story. God's going to take your situation and do something with it, because he doesn't want you to stay sick and apathetic, living a pointless life. He wants to call you to an abundant life. So in chapter 10, he's going, I came that you might have life. In chapter 11, he begins raising people from the dead, which is insane. But this is what he says. He goes, this is being done. This is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Your sickness matters. Your struggle matters. You going through what you've had to go through in your life matters, because the promise is God will take it and use it for his glory and your good. Amen. So he says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Let me read that again. How many of y'all do this? You find out your loved one is sick, and so you go, you know what? I love them so much, I'm not going to go to them. That's wild, right? But this is on purpose. This is not a mistake. We're not reading this wrong. Jesus is saying, because I love them so much, I'm not going to go to him yet. This is Jesus' mentality. Jesus is going, I'm going to let Lazarus die because of the love that I have for these people. Okay, so check this out. He goes, Jesus loved these people, and because of the love, not bad. We got that verse intro on there and everything. Jesus loved these people, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was. I love them enough to stay put and not go to them, right? And here's why. Check it out. We're jumping down to chapter 11, verse 11. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. So now he's talking to his disciples. He's going, Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. And Jesus had been speaking of his death, but they didn't understand. They thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. So he knows he's sick, and he knows he can get there in time, but he doesn't. He goes, I love these people so much, I'm going to stay a couple more days. That way, by the time I get there, he's all the way dead, right? Which is wild unless you're Jesus. So he goes, so then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us now go to. This is what Jesus is going. He's going, I love him enough to let Lazarus die. For your sake, I'm glad I didn't go heal him. I'm glad I let him go to the grave, because now what's going to happen is going to be so big and so miraculous that it's going to cause some of us stubborn skeptics to believe. Amen. Because if it would have been a healing, Amen. I mean, you guys know, we all see the so-called healings. Maybe I shouldn't say so-called, because look, I know I'm a skeptic sometimes, but there's people who go, man, I've seen it. Like, I've seen it happen. But when I hear about another healing, I go, yeah, maybe. Maybe that's real. It's been faked before. Jesus, I mean, people in this time were faking it. People today are faking stuff like that. So if you're like me, if you're a little bit skeptical, you hear about a healing that somebody did, and you go, yeah, maybe. Like, could be miraculous, could be another ploy to get into their church or something like that. And so Jesus intentionally, he goes, I'm not going to go heal him. I'm going to raise him from the dead. I'm going to wait and let him die, which is insane. But that's what he says. He goes, and I'm doing it for your sake, so that you may believe. There's a story in the Old Testament. I won't take the time to explain it, but there's this amazing verse where he goes, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. Sometimes God lets us sit in our mess long enough that he can turn it into something good, right? He goes, look, this evil that you made for yourself, this brokenness that you brought into your life, or maybe you're the victim of hurtful people in your life, and so now you've got a mess and you're having to deal through the trauma and the healing of having to address that trauma. The promise that God tells us is what you intended for evil, God reworks for good. That God will take the bad in your life and turn it into an opportunity for you to live an abundant life. And so he waits for Lazarus to die, so that when he gets there, he can turn people from skeptics into believers. So here's what happens. Jumping down to John chapter 11, verse 30. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village. So he travels there to Bethany. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days by this point, and as he's arriving, he goes to the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. Really, she's going to greet Jesus. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, what she doesn't know, she's sitting there going, Jesus, you should have been here. You could have healed him. And Jesus is going, I know, that was the point. I know, if I would have been here, he wouldn't have died. And that's the problem. Because some of us, Bill, you've got this story. Danny, you've got this story. I've got this story. Some of us are stubborn enough in our own mess that we have to hit that low point. Like, we have to go to the grave before we start crying out for life again. Right. And some of y'all have been there. Maybe not, I mean, definitely not physically. I don't think any of y'all have physically died. I hear stories, I mean, maybe. But man, a lot of us, right? Like, we've been drugged through the mud a certain way, or we were just rebelling against God a certain way, that God had to bring us into the tomb in order to get our attention, to call us to life, to abundant and full life. And so she's going, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus in the back of his mind is going, that's the whole point. That's why I waited 2 more days, right? When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man, remember we preached that 2 weeks ago, have kept this man from dying? We've heard the stories. We know he's a healer. We know he does things that other people can't do. Like, isn't this the Jesus that everybody talks about? Why did he let this person die? And look, there's people looking at your life saying the same thing. If you're really a Christian, how'd you get into the mess that you're in? Don't you have Jesus that's ready to bail you out, right? Like people ask that of Jesus. They go, Jesus, why did you let this happen? Why didn't you do it my way? Because I know better, right? I'm smarter than you. Like, why didn't you do it my way? Why would you allow this to happen? And so they're going, couldn't you have saved this guy? And Jesus, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. Look at this. But Lord, I encourage you, read this in the King James if you haven't. He uses the word stinketh in the King James, which is a word we shouldn't have retired. But in the NIV it says, but Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been dead there 4 days. Before Jesus brings us to life, how many of this is our story, right? People look at us and they go, nah, don't even go there. Don't even look that direction. Like that person is the wrong kind of odorist, right? And it might not be our hygiene. I mean, some of us just live life in such a way that other people keep their distance. They don't even want to be around. Like some of us, like we're the stinky rejects that people don't want to be around anymore. And so there's people going, don't even bother. He's too far gone. He's a lost cause. He's hopeless. He's dead. He's very, very dead. He's 4 days dead. The tomb has been sealed. Like there's going to be the odor of rot and death. And believe me, there's Jesus followers who treat other people this way. They go, no, they don't make enough money. They don't dress right on Sunday morning. They don't believe exactly what I believe. Don't even bother. They're too far dead for you to do anything with. And this is the idea that Lazarus is just too far gone. You can't heal somebody that's this dead. Am I speaking to anybody? Because some of you guys know. Some of you guys come from a dark background. You're sitting there going, oh, he can heal. Like Jesus can return dead people to life because he did it in my life as well. And some of you were the people that other people looked at and they judged you and they criticized you and they said, that person is too far gone. Don't even bother. There's going to be an odor. He's too dead. And Jesus says, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. He prays this prayer to God. I know that you always hear me, but I say this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. So again, the only reason Jesus is here is going, I just need people to believe. I want them to see me do this so that their life will change. He says, I'm saying this so that they will believe that I'm from you. And when he had said this, Jesus calls out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. I love that lack of transition there, right? With no drama, no fanfare, nothing else. He says, Lazarus, come out. The very next verse, the dead man came out. If you are saved, I mean saved. I don't mean religious. I don't mean you believe Christian things. I mean, Jesus has come into your life and taken you from where you were to where you are now by the power of the Holy Spirit. I'm not talking about religious people. I'm not talking about church people. I'm talking about saved people. If Jesus has saved you, this is your story. The story is, man, I was dead and Jesus called me. He said, get up and walk. And now I'm here. And that's it. And man, if I don't mind, I know I preached half a sermon using Bicycle Bill as my illustration a few weeks ago. If you don't mind me saying so again, I even said in the sermon, I'm like, this guy always brings it back to Jesus. And I was talking to you earlier, and the first thing out of his mouth, I'm like, man, like, I'm so glad you're here. I want people to hear your story. And he's like, my story, it's all about Jesus. The first thing out of his mouth, he goes, as long as these people know that it's all Jesus, right? Like my story is the story of Jesus. Amen. And so here he's sitting there going, man, that's the story, right? Jesus said, get up, and now I'm here. Like, that's it. There's no segue, there's no transition, there's no in between. Jesus called my spiritually dead self to life, and I woke up. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So Jesus says, I'm doing this so that you may believe. He does this miracle, this amazing, crazy, insane work. And the result of that is some believed and some hated him for it. And that seems to always be the nature of the church, that seems to always be the moment you start getting involved in serving people and loving people and calling people to a better life and inviting people to live a life of purpose in their calling, what you will find is some people will see Jesus and believe, and other people will see Jesus and hate you for asking them to change. He says, some believe, some didn't. Brianna's like, move along. 6 days before the Passover. So we're fast forwarding. This is, remember, Passover is the week that Jesus was sent to the cross. So this is right before that. I feel like we've been preaching Easter backwards this year, because last year we had already gone over the triumphal entry for last week. This week, we're 6 days before the Passover. Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. And here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. You guys ever stopped and thought about that verse? What would it be like if you're Lazarus and you were brought back to life, like you were sick and in bad health, and now you're just vibing, right? Like now you're just like, I'm living my best life, right? And so like we go from this dead, sick man being brought to life to this man just hanging out with Jesus. He's just reclining at the table with Jesus. And the thing about it is people notice that, right? Let me say it again. If you're not following me here. Easter matters because you matter, right? That's my premise to you this morning. You have a story that matters. You have a life that matters. You have a testimony and a message that matters. And so to watch this transformation, to watch Jesus bring somebody back from the dead, and then the very next time they're referenced in Scripture, one chapter later, it's just them living their best life, reclining at the table with Jesus. And like some of y'all, like that's your story, right? Some of y'all, I'm thinking about some of our members here who like, I'll wait. Let me get there. I don't want to like tattle on people, but man, I get to talk to a lot of you guys, and I'm just so aware, man. Like some of you were like, I was sleepwalking through my life. I was lost, right? The Christian lingo, as we say, we're lost, right? And like when we talk about lost people, we're not talking about bad people. We're not talking about evil people. We're not talking about the people that hate Christians. A lot of people hate Christians because Christians have done things to make them hate us, right? Like that's valid and that's real. A lot of people do evil things because they are hurt people. And what's the saying? Hurt people, right? And so look, when we talk about lost people, we're just saying there are some of us, if you're a believer, this is your story. If you're really saved, there are some of us who realize we were living a life that was not the life we were supposed to live. Right. And for some of you, that was a coming out of the grave moment. God saved you from a dark and bad place. Some of you, it was like you had been sleeping and Jesus woke you up. And so I think about some of our members here who we've got members in our church who were drug addicts, and Jesus came into their life and they walked away from it and they live a totally different life now. I'm also thinking about some of our members that there's one of our members who he's been a Christian man for years and years and years. He's been happily married for years and years and years. And over the last few years, God just woke him up. And he looked around and he's like, I've been doing this church thing for a long time, but I haven't been living according to my purpose. I've been doing this marriage thing for a long time, but my marriage hasn't been blessed and fulfilling. And he's sitting there going, and I think I've been part of the problem. Like I'm the reason why that has happened. And it's like God got a hold of him and he realized he spent years sleepwalking through his life. And so we read these verses going, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. And there's so many people who call themselves Christians who know you are sleepwalking through your life. You're not living a life of purpose. You feel the discontentment. You feel the loneliness. You keep doing things that you wish you weren't doing. You know it's not getting you healthy and it's not making you better or getting you to a better place, but you keep doing it because you are asleep. And then God comes in and he just starts waking people up. And when you see it happen, if that's not your story, but it's like the person next to you's story, is it not the most compelling story you've ever heard? Let me show you this. He's reclining at the table with him. We jump down a little bit further. Down in verse 9. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came. Not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus. You see that? Not only because of Jesus. Literally, the word says in the original language something closer to not merely, or not just because of Jesus, but because of Lazarus. Like people are like, man, I've heard of this healer, I've heard of this rabbi, but I want to see the guy he raised from the dead. I want to look at him. I want to look in his eyes and go, really? You were in the tomb for 4 days and now you're here? Like that's your story. Like people aren't there just for Jesus. They're there to see Lazarus. It's his story. Easter matters because you matter, because you've got a story. If you're a believer, if you're saved by Jesus, the message is, man, tell your story. Because there's some people, man, like they've heard enough of Jesus. They've heard about it. How many of you, if you're not a Christian, or maybe you're not just a church person, maybe you're one of those people, you're like, I believe in God, but there's some messed up churches doing some messed up things. I don't want to be a part of it. That's a lot of our story, and I'm right there with you. I promise. That's why we're trying to do it differently. Okay? If you're one of those people, you're like, it's the church I have a problem with, it's the Jesus people, then tell me if this isn't you. You've heard the story of Jesus enough times that you don't care that much about it. Sure, another guy claiming to have the answer, claiming to be the healer. But when you start seeing people whose lives have been changed, isn't that an interesting story? Doesn't that get your attention? Look at this. Let me read it again. They're there to go see Jesus, but not only because of Jesus, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing him. On account of who? On account of Lazarus. They're ready to kill Lazarus because on account of Lazarus, not the story of Jesus, the story of Lazarus. On account of his story, many people are believing in Jesus. Look, listen, let me say it this way. A lot of you have been convinced that it's all about Jesus and you've got to minimize yourself, and that's not the message. The message is you've got a story to tell. There are people that need to hear your story because they've heard so much about Jesus that they don't care anymore. They've been lied to so many times by so many people professing Christ that they don't believe the Jesus story. But they'll believe your story when they see the life change, when they've seen the death brought to life. There's so many people that are going, yeah, sure, Jesus, whatever. But you show them Lazarus, you go, man, I'm the one. I was spiritually dead. I was lost. I was so far removed from the blessings and promises of God that God had to wake me up out of my grave and get my attention, and my whole life changed. That's a story that people find fascinating. And so you'll see the two categories here. There's people that are fascinated by it, and there's people who are threatened by it and want to stop it. And if you're a Christian, you felt both. You've seen the people that you realize they're fascinated, not by Jesus yet. They'll get to Jesus. They're not fascinated by Jesus yet. They're fascinated by you. Because how many people have done awful things in the name of Jesus, right? People have been fooled so long that people don't want to hear the Easter story of Jesus. They're sick of it. They're over it. They're going, I don't know if I believe it. But when you show it to them, when you go, man, I am living testimony that God doesn't just call you out of your grave, but he calls you to an abundant life in him. So listen, if you're here as a guest, if you're not a Christian, you're not a believer, you're just checking all this stuff out, I don't expect you to buy into the story of Jesus yet. Not until you've seen it modeled well in the hearts and lives of the Jesus followers here today. See, when we show our story, when we tell our story well, when we go, let me tell you my story so that you'll get a glimpse of Jesus. Let me show you what Jesus has done with my life so that you can see what he could possibly do with your life. When you start sharing your story honestly and fully, and you get away from the whole religious game where you got to pretend to look good amongst all of your other religious friends, when you be honest about what's going on in your life and how Jesus has brought you from darkness to light and from the grave into an abundant life, people start to remember why the story of Jesus is so good. And when you tell your resurrection story, the resurrection story of Jesus begins to make sense. Jesus conquered the grave, and on the third day, the tomb was empty, proving that he can give life where there was death. And that story matters because we've seen him do it. He did it for Lazarus. He did it for us. And if you're here and you're a guest, he'll do it for you. And you don't have to believe us. Watch. Stick around long enough, right? Hang out with Christians long enough that you see the abundant life. And hear the stories, man. Listen to the stories of the people here today who go, man, I was in a rough place. I was in a dark place. I was lost. And then Jesus woke me up. You hear enough of those stories, you begin to believe. And when you begin to believe, you begin to put your faith in him. You begin to have your life changed as well. Because Jesus came that you may have life and have it abundantly. He loves you. He cares about you. He's here for you. He wants to call you to a higher purpose and to a life that matters. And so, look, we celebrate Easter because Easter is when Jesus did the work to accomplish what he's doing in our lives. And I'll say this. We meet at the Bayou Bijou Theater on the UL student campus. If you're here this morning and you're a guest, I want to invite you, worship with us, hang out with us, make sure you're in Christian community and you have people that love you and support you and want the best for you. Like come to church with us, man. Church is a good thing. It's such a great thing to be around believers who are living a life that looks more like Jesus than the life we're living. It's a good thing to do that. But listen, if you walk away here today going, I don't buy it. I don't think those people are for real. Don't come back. You don't have to. There's no pressure here. Okay? Let me say it. We're not inviting you to church because we think you should go to church. We're inviting you to church because we think if you come a few times, you'll hear the stories of life change and you'll start to ask God how he wants to change your life. And so, man, if you hear the stories today, if we are for real, then come join us, be with us, and see how we can do this different. See how we can be a church that loves community and loves people and wants people to step into an abundant life. And if that's for you, if that's a message that God just wants you to receive, then join us. But look, I'm not trying to sell you anything. It's not fake. I'm not trying to coerce you. And so if you walk away here going, those people are fake, enough on us. But I believe there's enough of us. There's enough real believers willing to share their story that we can invite you into the abundant life that Jesus died to give us. On the third day, the tomb was empty. Jesus conquered the grave, and he wants to do the same for your life as well. You just have to accept it and receive it and step into your faith. We invite you to do that. If this leaves you with more questions than answers, will you come talk to us? I'd like to, can I get our elders to raise their hand if you guys don't mind, Joe and Chad? The guys raising their hand are a couple of the spiritual leaders in this church. If you've got questions about this, go talk to them. Come talk to me. We want to love on you. We want to encourage you. We want to pray with you. More than that, we just want to show off Jesus to you. We want to tell you the stories about how Jesus has changed our life. So we just invite you to do that. If you'd like prayers right now, we invite you to come forward. All the rest of us, let's stand, let's sing, and afterwards we're going to go eat and have a good time. Thank you guys. Before the throne of God, I have a strong and perfect plea.